It was the kind of Louisiana morning where the air stuck to your lungs, the kind where the sun rose slow, but the silence hit first. A boy thin no older than 14 walked up to the front porch of a brick house on Cleveland Street in Shreveport. He wasn't selling chocolate bars, wasn't raising money for a sports team. He was carrying a cloth satchel, worn at the corners, inside 5 paperback King James Bibles. He knocked, not too hard, not too soft. The door creaked open. A man in a stained undershirt looked him up and down. "What is it I'm selling Bibles, sir? Just $5 apiece." The man chuckled. "Not kindly. Kid, you think anyone's buying a Bible around here?" Then he slammed the door. The wood echoed like a shotgun crack through the porch. But the boy didn't flinch, didn't beg, didn't cry. He adjusted the satchel on his shoulder and turned toward the next house. As he stepped off the porch, a curtain moved. Someone had been watching. From the back. His name was Mike Johnson. And that morning, like many before it, he walked door to door selling the Word of God. Not because he was on a mission trip, not because he had a youth group badge, but because his family needed milk. And his baby brother had a cough that wouldn't go away. He didn't sell for pride, he sold for survival. Now, fast forward 30 years. A different door opens. Same country, same constitution. But this time it's not some cracked paint screen door in Louisiana. It's the Speaker's office on Capitol Hill. And the man walking in, that boy, that same Mike Johnson, now wearing a suit, still carrying that Bible, and outside cameras, reporters, and the same world that once laughed at him, now watching. But they didn't know the whole story. Not yet. They knew the title Speaker of the House. They didn't know the road, the nights he went without dinner, the jobs he took before sunrise, the names they called him, the doors that closed in his face. They didn't know that the Bible he placed his hand on during the oath was the same kind he used to carry in that satchel. The world saw a politician, but behind that calm voice was a boy who never raised his hand to beg, only to knock. Because some people climb, some people inherit, but some people get there the old way, door by door, no shortcuts, no pity. And what happened at that last house, the one where the man laughed, let's just say the boy didn't argue, didn't protest, he just moved on. But the person watching from the back, they did something that changed everything. And when you hear what it was, you'll understand why this man, this quiet Southern Baptist lawyer turned speaker, never talks about ambition. He talks about conviction, because for him this was never politics. This was personal. Most people remember their childhood in seasons. Summer breaks, birthday cakes, family vacations to the beach or the mountains. But Mike Johnson, he remembers his childhood in utility bills, in coughs that wouldn't stop, in spoons of powdered milk and long walks to nowhere. The Johnson home in Shreveport was no mansion. 2 bedrooms, 4 kids, one mother working 2 shifts. His father, a firefighter, died early. The kind of man who wore boots even at home. His photo sat above the kitchen sink next to a cracked cross made of cedar wood. Mike was the oldest. That meant the flashlight under the blanket to study for tests. That meant folding clothes for siblings before sunrise. That meant saying no thank you when the teacher asked if he brought lunch. Every single choice he made back then was between feeding his family or feeding his pride. And pride never won. One day at school, a boy named Travis pointed to Mike's shoes duct tape across the toe, scuffed from wear. "What are you, the Bible boy or the homeless prophet?" Kids laughed. Mike smiled. But deep down, that smile wasn't peace. It was survival. He walked home that day with his head down. Not from shame, from exhaustion. When he opened the fridge, there was a half-empty jar of pickles, a gallon of milk that had turned, and 1 slice of bread. He took the bread, split it into 4, gave each sibling a corner, told them it was holy bread, and they believed him. He didn't eat. At church, things weren't easier. He wore a suit too small, trousers that revealed ankles, a tie borrowed from the donation box, but he stood straight. When the congregation sang, "How Great Thou Art," Mike didn't mouth the words, he belted them. Because when you have nothing, you sing like you've already been saved. The pastor once called him the quiet hammer, because he didn't talk much. But every time a task was too heavy, Mike picked it up. No complaints, no drama. He wasn't the smartest kid in the room. He was the one cleaning the room when everyone else had gone home. And then came the worst month. The landlord knocked. Their rent was 3 weeks late. Utilities were cut off for 48 hours. His youngest sister had a fever, the kind that makes you panic when you touch her forehead. Mike did what any boy shouldn't have to. He opened a phone book, found the address of every church, every charity, every printing press that sold Bibles wholesale. He walked 10 miles in worn-out shoes to buy a box of 10 paperback King James Bibles. He paid with coins, quarters, nickels, and prayers. That night he didn't cry. He cleaned the kitchen table, stacked the Bibles, and wrote out a pitch. "Sir, I'm not here to disturb your evening, but if you believe in second chances, I've got the good book in my hand and milk to buy for my baby brother." He memorized it, practiced it in the mirror. But when the doors opened, most people didn't let him finish. One woman said try selling that on Sunday. Another man just shut the door halfway through, and still he kept knocking. By the end of that week, he'd sold 3. Enough for milk, and 1 bottle of cough syrup. His siblings never knew. His mom never asked. But every time he looked at that tattered satchel, he remembered something most people forget. When you're at the bottom, dignity doesn't come from being noticed. It comes from not quitting. And Mike Johnson never quit. But survival isn't just about bread and rent. Sometimes the deeper cost is how people look at you. And more importantly, how they don't. When Mike Johnson entered high school, he was already used to being invisible. He wasn't the football star, wasn't the prom king. He was the kid who sat in the back row of English class highlighting verses in a paperback Bible, while the others passed notes or practiced cursive on love letters. A substitute teacher once asked Mike, "What are you always reading?" When he replied, "The book of Proverbs," she smiled politely and never called on him again. That's how it works sometimes. You speak about wisdom, and the world tunes you out. During debate club tryouts, he showed up in hand-me-down slacks and a shirt that didn't quite match. One of the boys auditioning before him, slick hair, sharp words whispered to the coach loud enough for all to hear. "Is he here to argue or convert us?" Everyone laughed, except Mike. He took the stage, spoke calmly. His topic, the moral fabric of a nation, depends not on its laws, but on the hearts of its families. Silence. When he finished, the coach cleared his throat, then moved on. He didn't make the team, but the lesson stuck. It wasn't the words that made people uncomfortable. It was the conviction behind them. Mike didn't speak to win applause. He spoke like someone who'd had to defend every dollar, every prayer, every quiet act of dignity in a world that didn't owe him a thing. There was one night he'd never forget. A local youth rally, big church, bright lights. A guest speaker flew in from Dallas. After the sermon, teenagers gathered at the front, singing, hugging, crying. Mike stood at the back, alone. Then, a girl from his school, someone who'd never spoken to him before, turned around and said, "Don't you get tired of being the weird kid with the Bible?" He could have said 100 things. Could have recited scripture. Could have walked out. Instead, he looked at her and said, "I'd rather be called weird for believing in something than be lost and never be found." She didn't reply, just turned back. But the youth pastor, who'd been nearby, heard it. And that night he gave Mike a ride home. He asked nothing. Said nothing. Just played hymns on the radio and handed him an old commentary book at the door. Written on the inside cover, "Stand firm. The world will move. You stay." That book sat on Mike's nightstand for years. And every time he felt the weight of being mocked, ignored, or misjudged, he flipped it open and reminded himself, this isn't about being liked. It's about being steady. And steady he was. Even when his classmates got new cars, and he was still peddling his rusted-out Schwinn. Even when his friends planned prom, and he stayed home to babysit his siblings because mom picked up a double shift. Even when teachers chuckled at his essays for quoting scripture instead of statistics. One winter night he came home late, Bible satchel in one hand, school bag in the other. He opened the door and saw his little sister asleep on the floor, wrapped in a blanket too thin for January. The heater had gone out. He dropped his bags, took off his jacket, wrapped it around her, then sat by the window. No tears, no anger, just a boy asking heaven if anyone was listening. He didn't know then that in just a few decades, he would be the one others listened to. That his voice, the same soft voice dismissed in debate, club mocked in youth group, ignored in hallways, would echo through the halls of Congress. But that night, he wasn't thinking about the future. He was just hoping the milk would last until morning. It wasn't a headline, it wasn't a sermon, it wasn't even a loud moment. The shift happened quietly. It started in a library, a small underfunded branch 2 blocks from Mike's high school. He was there because the heater at home had broken again. The library had warmth and books. While other kids were scanning magazines, Mike sat in a corner with a case law volume too big for his lap, not because he was planning to be a lawyer, not then, but because it was the only section of the library where no one else ever sat. He wanted silence. But what he found was a case about religious liberty, about a student who'd been punished for bringing scripture into a classroom. The court had ruled in the student's favor, and Mike read every line, twice. It wasn't just the verdict, it was the tone, firm, measured. Truth rendered in legal argument. That night he didn't just study, he copied the entire summary by hand, page after page until his fingers cramped. He brought it to school the next morning, and when his civics teacher started class, Mike raised his hand. "Sir, last week you said the Constitution doesn't protect religion inside public institutions. I found something that says otherwise." The room stilled. Kids who never noticed Mike looked up. The teacher blinked. Mike read calmly, clearly, then handed over the copied case. The teacher didn't respond, just took it, nodded, and moved on. But something had shifted. That afternoon, as Mike was packing up, the teacher approached. "Where'd you get that, the downtown library? You read legal journals?" "No, sir, just one, just that one." The teacher paused, then said, "Ever thought of law school?" Mike didn't answer, because he hadn't. But that night he went home, and for the first time in years he dreamed about something beyond the next meal. Still, Mike didn't change overnight. He didn't buy a suit, didn't join the debate team again, didn't start lecturing classmates. But inside, something hardened, not in bitterness, in resolve. He began writing letters, to congressmen, to judges, to pastors, not to ask for help, but to ask questions. Where does the First Amendment begin? Can a nation lose its soul if it forgets its roots? Is truth still legal when it's inconvenient? Some never wrote back. Some did. One pastor even called. He said, "You don't write like a teenager. You write like a man who's seen storms." Mike smiled, because he had. And from that day on, every insult, every closed door, every joke about his faith, it stopped being pain. It became fuel. The world rarely turns its head for quiet people. But every now and then, quiet has a way of forcing silence. It started small. At church where he once sat alone, people started sitting closer. A deacon who once barely nodded asked Mike to lead a prayer. He didn't shout, didn't pace. He just bowed his head and said one sentence that no one forgot. "God help us not just survive, but walk in dignity when we have nothing." The room didn't say amen. It sat quiet, longer than usual. That silence, it wasn't absence, it was awe. At school things shifted too. Mike turned in a paper, an analysis of the role of conscience in American law. He quoted Jefferson Adams and the Apostle Paul. The teacher didn't roll her eyes. She gave it a B+, then added a note. "You may not be wrong." One day while walking home, a car pulled up beside him. Window rolled down. It was Mr. Delaney, a retired lawyer who volunteered at a legal aid clinic. "I heard about you," he said. "You ever think about clerking when you get to college?" Mike didn't know what to say. He didn't even know if college was possible. Delaney tossed him a card. "Just in case you get tired of carrying that satchel." Mike didn't smile. He nodded. But something deep inside, the part that had learned to expect rejection, began to loosen its grip. Then came the invitation. A youth convention, statewide. One student from each high school nominated by staff. Mike was chosen. He thought it was a mistake. He asked the office clerk. She looked up and said, "Mr. Harlan said you earned it." "Mr. Harlan?" The same civics teacher who once dismissed him. That weekend, Mike stood on a stage in Baton Rouge. He didn't give a speech. He read from a letter he'd written to God when his family lost power one winter. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking to be known. I'm just asking that I not be hardened. That I still feel kindness when it finds me. When he finished, a woman in the crowd, a principal from another district, stood and said, "Son, you just reminded us what leadership sounds like." Mike didn't become class president, didn't win scholarships by the dozens, but doors started opening. Not because he knocked louder, but because the room on the other side had started listening. The boy they once called Bible Kid now had a new name. They called him the Conviction One. That name would follow him. To law school, to courtrooms, to Congress. But back then it was just a whisper. The kind that spreads, not by volume, but by truth. Washington doesn't care where you come from. It only cares how loud you speak and how many people will listen. So when Mike Johnson arrived at Capitol Hill, he didn't bring a megaphone. He brought a notebook, a leather-bound one, the kind with ribbon markers and pages that held more scripture than slogans. Freshman congressman. No name, no headlines. Just the quiet man from Louisiana. Some called him placeholder. Some said he'd be gone by the next cycle. But they didn't know. They didn't remember the boy who walked door to door carrying Bibles in the rain. And they didn't see it coming the day the House floor stopped breathing because of what he said. It was a routine debate, a bill on religious expression in public schools. The opposition was fierce. The room full of firebrands and fast talkers. One Congresswoman seasoned sharp stood and said, "Let's be honest. What Mike Johnson and his kind want is to turn classrooms into churches." The chamber laughed. Not all, but enough. Mike didn't stand immediately. He waited. He opened his notebook. And when the speaker gave him the floor, he didn't raise his voice. He raised his conviction. "Madam Speaker," he began, "I'd like to tell you a story." He didn't cite a policy. He told them about a boy. 14, torn shoes, empty fridge, a bag full of Bibles. A teacher once told that boy he'd never matter. That the world didn't run on conviction but compliance. He paused. "But I am that boy. And I'm here today because someone somewhere gave me the freedom to believe. Not in a party, not in a platform, but in a truth older than this chamber." The room fell quiet. He closed the notebook, looked at the Congresswoman, not with anger, but with something far more powerful patience. "Madam, you mocked my past, but you proved my point. Because the moment we ridicule belief, we confess our fear of it." The silence was louder than any gavel. A reporter seated behind the press gallery texted her editor. He didn't shout, but he shut the whole place down. After the session, a Democratic aide unknown to Mike walked past and whispered, "You made my grandfather proud today. He sold Bibles too." Mike nodded, didn't smile, just whispered back. Then we're both standing on his shoulders. It wasn't viral, wasn't loud, but in offices, in chaplain meetings, in staff cafeterias, they started saying his name differently. Not Speaker Hopeful, not Christian nationalist, but the one who stood without raising his voice. And back in Louisiana at a diner near the church where he grew up, an old woman placed her hand on the TV screen when she saw the clip. "That's our Mike," she whispered, still carrying the word. "Just a different kind of door now." A week later, the clip resurfaced. Not on a faith channel, not in a conservative circle, but on a late-night comedy show. They played the part where Mike talked about the boy, about walking through the rain with a satchel of Bibles. Then came the punchline. The host smirked, mocked the accent, added a laugh track. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Speaker of Shreveport," he said, "where public policy runs on psalms and pickup trucks." The audience roared. Backstage, one staffer asked, "Do we expect a response?" Another replied, "No. He's too calm, too soft. He won't take the bait." They were right and wrong, because Mike Johnson didn't take the bait. He set a new hook. The next morning on C-SPAN, he was scheduled to appear for a panel on constitutional boundaries. Producers asked if he wanted to cancel given the viral clip. He said no. He showed up in a charcoal suit, notebook in hand. And when the moderator opened with a jab, "Congressman Johnson, shall we begin with the book of Exodus?" He smiled, looked at the camera, then said, "No, Let's begin with Article 1, Section 8, the part your writer skipped. The room blinked. He continued, "See, humor is a beautiful thing, but mocking belief, that's not satire. That's surrender. Surrender to the idea that anything deep must be ridiculed because we no longer understand it." There was no laugh track, just silence. Then the moderator, trying to recover, said, "Well, you've certainly got conviction." Mike nodded. Conviction built this country. Laughter didn't cross the Delaware. That moment, it went further than the comedy clip. Not because it was louder, but because it was cleaner, sharper, undeniable. Newsrooms debated it. Clips went side by side. One showed mockery, the other stillness, control, and something America hadn't seen in a long time. A man who didn't flinch. That night in private, Mike wrote a letter. To the comedian. He didn't mail it, didn't post it, just wrote it. It read, "I understand you laughed. I understand you made a living that way. But when I walked those streets with 5 Bibles, I wasn't performing. I was feeding my siblings. And when I speak today, I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to remember what kind of country lets a boy like that stand where I now stand." He folded the letter, tucked it into his notebook. Didn't say another word about the incident. But across the aisle, across the country, people felt it. The man who stayed silent carried the loudest truth. The shift didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly, like most real things do. In the weeks that followed Mike Johnson's moment on C-SPAN, there were no parades, no victory laps. But the calls changed. The emails changed. The way people said his name in congressional halls changed. Staffers who once walked past him without a nod now stopped mid-stride. "Sir, my grandmother watches everything you say," one young assistant whispered in the cafeteria. "She says you remind her of someone. Someone who used to lead with their Bible open, not their mouth." Back home in Louisiana, something even more surprising happened. A man named Harold LeBlanc, once a vocal critic of Johnson's religious stance, posted a letter to the local paper. He didn't retract his opposition. He didn't apologize. What he did was harder. He said, "I still don't agree with Mike Johnson's politics, but I watched him last week, and for the first time I believed he wasn't performing. He was remembering something the rest of us forgot, that conviction doesn't require permission." The letter went viral. Not because it was loud, but because it was honest. Churches that once considered him too political invited him back. Veterans groups called to say, "We know what it's like to be mocked by people who've never seen sacrifice." And at a high school 20 miles from where he grew up, a teacher wrote his name on the whiteboard beneath the words "Integrity in Public Life." The students didn't laugh. They took notes. But the most defining moment of that shift came not in Washington. It came on a small stage in Monroe, Louisiana, at a town hall held in a converted feed store. Fold-out chairs, a rusty mic stand. Maybe 60 people showed up. Among them, a teenage boy, skinny shy, sat in the second row with a notebook just like Mike's. He didn't speak during the Q&A. He waited until everyone else had left. Then he walked up slowly, hands shaking, and said, "Sir, I don't think anyone listens to me. At school, at home. But when I saw you stand there and not flinch, I thought, maybe that's how you start, by not flinching." Mike didn't offer a speech. He didn't quote a verse. He just handed the boy his pen. The same one he used to take notes in Congress. "Write it down," he said. "Even when no one listens, write it down. Because one day they will. And when they do, you'll want your story ready." That moment didn't make the news, but it made a leader. Back in Washington, senior members began inviting him to closed-door meetings. Not because he asked, but because they needed someone who didn't posture, didn't tweet. Rage didn't confuse sarcasm with strength, one senator whispered as Mike entered the room. He's the one they underestimated. And the speaker gavel, it wasn't handed to him. It was earned in silence, vote by vote. Not because he rallied power, but because he never tried to steal it. His name began appearing in headlines. Not flashy, but firm. The quiet hammer rises. Mike Johnson conviction without volume. The New South without the noise. And yet amid all of it, he stayed the same. Still carried the same leather notebook. Still prayed alone before each vote. Still called his mother every Sunday. When asked by a journalist what had changed most in his life since becoming speaker, he paused, then said nothing. Except now more people knock on my door, and maybe that was the point. The boy who once knocked on doors selling Bibles to keep his family fed had become the man others turned to, hoping to find what he never lost: steadiness, grace under pressure, conviction without spectacle. And the world? It hadn't just noticed, it had started to follow. It was a Sunday afternoon like many before it. Rain tapping gently against the kitchen window. The kind of soft, gray Louisiana day that made the whole house smell like coffee and worn wood. Mike Johnson sat on his old couch, still the same one from their first house in Bossier Parish, though reupholstered more times than he could count. Across from him sat his son, a teenager now, with questions that didn't come from homework but from watching the world. "Dad," he asked quietly, "why don't you fight back when people mock you? I saw what that host said last week. They called you the Bible boy in a suit." "I'd be angry. I don't get how you just let that go." Mike didn't respond right away. He looked down at his hands. Strong hands, but not large. The kind of hands that once held Bibles for sale, wiped noses, fixed rusted pipes under a leaky sink. The kind that never hit back but never trembled either. He reached for the leather notebook sitting on the coffee table. The one he always kept close. "Let me tell you something," he said. "I've been laughed at since I was younger than you. For my shoes, for my faith, for knocking on doors with nothing but a few scriptures and a prayer." He looked up, but not once did I feel smaller. "Because when you know who you are, son, the world can't shrink you." The boy stayed silent, listening, absorbing, Mike continued. "You know what anger is?" he asked. "It's the fastest way to forget who you are. That's what they want. They want a headline. They want a clip. They want to see you break, because then they can say you were never strong. But you don't serve them. You serve God. You serve the truth. And truth doesn't shout. It endures." He paused, picked up his coffee mug chipped at the rim, just like the one his father used to drink from when coming home from long firehouse shifts. Your grandpa didn't yell at the world. He protected it, quietly, faithfully. One fire, one home at a time. The room was warm, not from heat, but from something deeper. A peace that didn't come from the absence of conflict, but from standing on the other side of it, still whole. Mike leaned forward. "When they call me names, I don't hear insult. I hear recognition. That means they see something different, something they don't understand. And son, what they don't understand, they fear. What they fear, they mock. But you never answer fear with fire. You answer it with foundation." His son shifted eyes, still locked. "So what do you do instead?" Mike smiled. "You write it down. You tell your story. You stay steady. One day someone else will be watching, wondering how you held your ground when everything pushed against it. That's leadership. That's fatherhood. That's faith." Then he reached into his notebook, pulled out a piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, creased from being folded too many times. It was the pitch he used as a boy, the same one he wrote at the kitchen table the night his little sister was sick and they didn't have milk. He handed it to his son. "This fed your aunt. This kept the lights on. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real." The boy held the paper like it was glass. "Did you ever think back then you'd end up here?" he asked. "No," Mike said. "I just thought about the next door, the next knock, the next prayer." He leaned back, eyes soft. "Turns out sometimes all God asks is that you keep walking. He'll handle where it leads." The boy nodded slowly. Then, almost in a whisper, said, "I think I'm starting to understand." And in that moment there were no cameras, no microphones, no podiums, just a father, a son, and a truth older than politics, deeper than policy. That dignity, true dignity, doesn't shout. It roots itself in silence, in service, in moments like this. The rotunda was quiet. Late evening light spilled through the tall windows of the Capitol dome, casting long golden beams across the marble floor. Mike Johnson walked slowly alone, a copy of the day's resolutions under his arm. He wasn't rushing. He never did. Not here. Not in the house that belonged not just to politics, but to memory. He paused beneath a statue of Abraham Lincoln, looked up, closed his eyes. Then whispered. He didn't scream either. That's when a young Capitol staffer passed by, offered a nod, and said, "Speaker Johnson." He nodded back. But as the young man disappeared down the hallway, Mike turned to the statue and smiled faintly. "He has no idea," he murmured. "No idea where I came from." He remembered it then. All of it. The cracked sidewalk in front of the red brick house. The first door, the first slam, the first laugh. And the first time he told himself, "Don't fight back with fists. Fight back with faith. Don't raise your voice. Raise your standard." Across the country, his story had begun to seep into places he'd never been. Sunday sermons quoted his lines. Small-town teachers taught his testimony. Military chaplains played clips of his floor speech to new recruits, telling them, "This is what standing firm looks like." But Mike didn't see it as fame. He saw it as stewardship, responsibility. He often said, "We don't rise for ourselves. We rise for someone else's sake." In a televised town hall, a woman in her 70s asked him directly, "How did you survive the mockery?" Mike paused. "I didn't survive it," he said. "I outlasted it. You don't fight mockery with volume. You fight it with legacy. You outlive it by outloving the people who throw it." She wept. And others around her wept too, because what he said wasn't political. It was deeply, painfully human. Later, after that broadcast aired, a man from Boston, atheist, liberal, lifelong Democrat wrote to him. The letter read, "Mr. Johnson, I don't believe in your God. I don't share your policies. But when you spoke, I thought of my father. The way he carried shame without complaint. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe I've been shouting too much and listening too little. Thank you for making me listen." Mike framed that letter, not for validation, but as proof that sometimes truth travels further than belief. That conviction has a sound all its own, and that sound is quiet, steady, unmistakable. Back in Louisiana, in the very church where he once sat alone in the back pew, the pastor told the congregation, "You all saw him on TV, but I saw him here, sweeping floors when no one asked, sitting beside widows when no one watched." Mike didn't find his voice in Washington. He brought it with him. That church now has a plaque on the last pew, "In honor of the quiet hammer," who sat here first and stood up later, not because he changed the world in a speech, but because he didn't let the world change who he was before the speech ever happened. And when asked near the end of his first year as speaker what advice he'd give to the next generation, Mike said, "Don't try to be loud. Try to be rooted." Because a rooted man doesn't fall when the storm comes. He bends, he prays. And when the winds pass, he's still standing. Then he looked at the camera. Soft eyes, firm voice, and added, "And if one boy with a satchel of Bibles could become Speaker of the House, don't tell me this country's lost. Don't you dare." And for a brief second, no one moved. The silence. It wasn't absence, it was reverence. So now you know the story. Not the headlines, not the sound bites, but the story of a boy with torn shoes, a cloth satchel, and 5 paperback Bibles. The door slammed on him. Remember that it wasn't just wood hitting frame. It was the world saying, "You don't belong." But he knocked again, and again. Not for applause, not for attention, for milk, for siblings, for survival. And he never let that moment define him. He let it refine him. And today he walks through the marbled halls of Congress. Same posture, same calm, same conviction. But now he's the one opening doors for others. Young men who wonder if dignity still has a seat at the table. Young women told they're too soft to lead. Blue-collar workers who pray before every shift and wonder if anyone in Washington still believes what they believe. He walks for them. So here's the truth. You don't need a stage to stand. You don't need to win arguments to win souls. You need memory. You need roots. You need to know who you are before the storm hits, because it will. And when it does, your response won't be a performance. It will be a pattern, a quiet echo of every knock you didn't walk away from. And if you're watching this, If you're someone who's ever been laughed at, overlooked, mocked for what you carry in your heart, then this story isn't just Mike's. It's yours. Because this country doesn't belong to the loudest. It belongs to the faithful, the steady, the ones who don't flinch. So if you believe that character matters again, that faith isn't weakness, that silence can carry strength, then don't scroll past this. Share it, not because it's flashy, but because it's forgotten, and things that are forgotten must be remembered out loud. And if you've got a son or a nephew or a student who thinks no one sees him, show him this. Remind him leadership isn't born in spotlights. It's born in back pews, in cold porches, in the moment when the world says no and you say, I'll knock anyway. Because someday someone else will knock, and they'll need to find a door you left open.